Three.
Hello, everyone. Before I introduce myself and start with the presentation, I would just like to take a moment to express my deepest gratitude to all of you being here with me today and showing curiosity about what I'm about to share. But most importantly to Linda, who so kindly said yes to my proposal to come to this platform and share what I've discovered in my astrological research around the coronavirus, and you'll see what else. And also to express what an honor it is to be speaking from a platform so many of my own astrology heroes have spoken from and speak from. And I have listed the biggest one, in the sense the ones I've either been working with or been trained by or had been client to or read books, but there are so many more that I didn't include here, and I wish to thank you all for all your generously shared knowledge and life wisdom on this amazing platform. Okay. Hello, my name is Maya, and this is my bias. I start like that deliberately because that's one of the key points I will be making, coming back to throughout the presentation, and you'll soon discover why. So, I am a Pluto in Virgo generation. I'm Pluto conjunct Jupiter conjunct South Node in Virgo. The ruler of these three is Mercury in Gemini, opposite Mars retrograde in 8th in Sag. Mars squares my Pluto, which, as you know, as we all know in evolutionary astrology, that is a signature of a lifetime. That's quite important, if I may say so. And my skip step, or rather I have a skip step, and it's my moon in Capricorn. It squares my nodal axis. And Venus and Chiron are conjunct in Aries, conjunct my North Node in Pisces. My nodal axis is at an erratic degree of Virgo and Pisces. And I'm in the middle of the Chiron return. Well, a year into it, so I had 2 hits, and I will have 2 more hits. And yeah, I'll write home about it sometime soon. And this other little visual there, also important to illustrate how my mind works. Mercury in Gemini, and just generally I consider myself to have a mutable cross. So yeah, I hope the feel of the mutability is obvious in this little visual, like I say, but also like how I went about discovering what I discovered for this presentation I'll be sharing with you. It's just, it would be like something would light up in a corner that seems unconnected, and I would just follow the hunch, and I'll find stuff that then illuminates the rest of the story. And it's just been such an adventure. So I hope you will enjoy it. Now, one more last piece before I go into the actual presentation, just to give you a brief background of me and astrology. Astrology became my main tool in my teens when I decided my parents, poor things, they deserve to have their life on their own and me to find answers elsewhere for what was wrong with me. Pluto in Virgo, right? And so astrology became the main tool, but it was really after my first Saturn return that I turned to, I used astrology consistently and intensely to explore the darker aspects of my psyche, my chart, and to get familiar with all that I rather not look into. And the reason I then eventually that was my astrology offering. That's what I do as an astrologer. Clients come to me when they want to face and hear things that maybe are not so easy to hear, because the language of archetypes is a metaphor. And metaphor is a gap in language that says, I'm now using a different concept to describe another concept. So that gap allows for that distance, which allows not to identify oneself so much with the intensity of the emotion that one is going through, but being that slightly removed allows for a bit of breathing space, observation, and in that gap, the work happens, shadow work. You actually can find the hand, metaphorically speaking, of that shadow, hold it, and actually start walking with it. Where if you're too wrapped up in it, yeah, I found you don't get to do the work as well. This is obviously, I'm 51, and it's taken almost this long to get quite good at this. So the presentation itself. The title is The Astrology of the Coronavirus. And I just want to kind of clarify that maybe a little bit to say that given my bias, I'm the most fascinated by language. A few other dissertations in my life of astrology, as in university degrees, have been about language. I'm bilingual as well, which is a big part in all of this, my understanding. And so what I was observing, what I was most interested in is what language do we use to describe our experience? I mean, this might be an obvious thing to most of us, all of us, some of us, I don't know. But yeah, it is certainly how I went about contemplating what's happening with coronavirus, as in the language using to describe our experience of it. And then obviously everything in my life is rooted in astrology on archetypes. And so what I've discovered is that essentially it's about a crisis of language and meaning making. And then I went and followed various crumbs and trails and believe I have something to offer in the sense of how to resolve this crisis. So hope you that's useful. So, yeah, sorry. So how do I make meaning of archetypes? So this is my little tip, if you like. This is how I do it for clients, but more so for just my own study of life and myself and astrology and yeah, cosmos, etc. So let's say our Aries archetype. So if I want to understand the ultimate meaning of Aries, I would look at the generation of Neptune in Aries, and then I would also read everything that's written about Aries-Neptune combination. If I want to understand the deepest desire of an archetype, its truth, the truth of that archetype, the bottom line, I go to Pluto. Again, I start with the generation of the archetype, Pluto in Aries, and then I expand researching around and looking for basically why do I look at generation, because I'm looking for those big trends, cultural trends that are showing up, that are changing the world or not, or adding, or always changing, right? If I want to understand the individuated and emancipated, the one that got away, that got free expression of an archetype, I look to Uranus. And if I want to understand what's the most painful, unbearably painful spot and hurt and wound of an archetype, I look to Chiron. But I also want to say that I look to, I see Chiron as how we make consciously shadow, how we create our own shadow consciously. Even if we say it's unconscious, it's us consciously deciding to be unconscious about it. So I'll go into more detail as I go along. But that's just how I make meaning out of archetypes. So you're probably not surprised then to hear that it all started with a metaphor for me, given my bias and everything I've shared so far with you. So this is my definition mixed with a bit of generic and dictionary kind of definitions of metaphor. A metaphor is a figure of speech that describes an idea by referring to another idea with similar characteristics in order, and this is my intention for this presentation, to offer fresh perspectives and novel connections. Sure, my Mars in Sagittarius squaring, Pluto is all about, yes, I want to persuade the world that I'm right, or that my point of view is amazing, and I sometimes succeed to a point. But really, my heart would be the fullest if at the end of this I have just made you curious about some of the things I'm sharing here. Some are a bit out there, some a bit radical, but yeah, they're at least, like I say, hopefully novel connections and fresh perspectives, and my job will have been done if I achieve that. So the metaphors that we have all heard on this platform, as well as everywhere else, I imagine, in the astrology world, are just some that I'm going to kind of bring up to remind us, so that I'll be kind of going back and forth from two. So quarantine and social distancing, Saturn in Aquarius. Stay at home, your future depends on it, North Node in Cancer. Airborne global pandemic, the age of Aquarius uprising. The end of an old social order, Pluto, Saturn, and South Node in Capricorn. So I'd like you now to just pause for a moment and observe and enjoy this painting. It's by Edward Hopper, an American painter from the late 19th century, early 20th. And I would imagine that you would agree with me that if we all looked outside of our windows now, unless we live in some beautiful wilderness, I'm not that lucky. But so us who live in urban, villages or town cities, if we looked outside our windows, I think we'd agree that this is probably what we'll see. However, these places otherwise would be full of bustling life, streets, you know, they're not at the moment. Now, this painting isn't about COVID or any pandemic at the time, and I'm not going to bore you with the art history, which is one of my degrees, just a little post moment, sorry. But what I do want to bring to your attention, and this is the kind of stuff that excites me about connecting things. This painter, Hopper, has Pluto, Saturn, South Node conjunction natally. And I find it very meaningful, deeply meaningful. He was depicting a new social order, or rather new society of, you know, urban and alienation after industrial revolution and all that. But it is a new social order, and we are facing one ourselves. So back to the actual 2020, 12th of January, Pluto-Saturn conjunction, contemplated many months before and since, like any other astrologer nowadays alive. And I like to think of it as the new soul mandate issued to us all collectively, but also to us individually, depending on your personal aspects, whether 22 degrees of Capricorn touched anything, or even if not, but yeah. So why? Because Soul Pluto, right? Now I'm a project manager in my previous life. And so this is a project management language. So you meet with a client, the two met in the dark night of the new moon phase conjunction. And they discussed what needs to be delivered. So Pluto's telling Saturn, this is what I want you to deliver for me, the soul saying, and because this is the next leg of the journey of my soul, of my evolution. And who better for the job than Saturn, right? So what do we do in astrology? If we are to understand what's been planted, seeded at the new moon phase, we look at the full moon to see what's going to come up, what's going to be illuminated. So I did that. So I looked at the Pluto-Saturn opposition, and I noticed a signature that I thought, this looks potentially significant. So I thought, okay, let me check. So I looked at two quarter squares. So first quarter square and the last quarter square, and the same signature appeared. At that point, I was getting quite excited. So, but then I thought, okay, let me just check whether this is still a fluke. So I checked the last two Pluto-Saturn conjunctions, so in Leo and then in Libra, and then I looked at their quarter squares, and no, is this long story short, no, there was no such signature. Then I looked at the last Pluto-Saturn conjunction in Capricorn in 1518, I think, and there was the signature that I'm referring to, I'll reveal in a second. But it wasn't at a Pluto square. So I thought, right, what I discovered, I do think is mega significant. So what I discovered is that at each of these critical relational points between Saturn and Pluto, Venus retrogrades in Gemini. Now, yes, Venus is the constant. And how beautiful that the only constant in this unfolding story is Gemini. I love that. But Pluto isn't. And like I say, I checked against the other same signatures of like relational between Saturn and Pluto, and she wasn't appearing. Or even there wasn't a retrograde Venus in the same sign. Or there wasn't a retrograde Venus at all. So I'm taking at this point, right or wrong, that this is a super significant moment to understand what this new soul mandate is about. And yeah, as I speak of it, you will see how a lot of it echoes what's going on, how we are living this coronavirus life, well, new life, or rather quarantine, I suppose. So let me just take you through this briefly. So we had a conjunction in 2020, obviously this year in 12th of January. It's a one-hit conjunction, I call them like that, so they go retrograde on them, but it's only once that they actually met at the exact, orb. And Venus is retrograde in the same year. Then in 2028, 23rd of June, they meet for the first time at a first quarter square. There are 3 hits, but they meet at the first hit, meaning, sorry, the Venus retrogrades around the first hit. In fact, she stations direct on the very day the two make the first contact in their first quarter square relationship phase. That year, and around that time, Uranus is in Gemini, and she crosses over him 3 times. In fact, there is a quadruple conjunction, but I'm not going to be going into that. Uranus, Mercury, Mars, and Venus are all in Gemini. But because how I make sense of archetypes, I'm looking at emancipated version of this Venus in Gemini, sorry. Because we are in an Aquarius age, or about to enter. I'm not going to go into that, whether we are there already or not. For me, we are. So for that reason, Uranus is important. Also, Pluto will be sextiling this Uranus, no, sorry, trining, because it will be in an exact orb between Uranus in Gemini, I think it's 8 degrees, and Pluto will be in 8 degrees Aquarius, and Neptune will be 8 degrees Aries. So the whole world, of stars is saying this is such a significant moment. This Gemini archetype is being supported by everyone. At least that's how I see it. And then in 2036 is the full phase opposition. It's the last hit. So I love how she's at the bookends of this. So last hit, and Chiron is in Gemini. She crosses over Chiron 3 times. And then the last quarter square, 1 hit only. So there are 1 hit, 1 hit. There are those bookends within bookends. And she retrogrades just a few months later. Now, she answers to, she meaning Venus in Gemini, right? Answers to Mercury. Because I'm looking across a big time span, I'm not really concentrating on Mercury on that particular day or whatever. I'm just looking at Mercury across the year because it's retrograde Venus I'm looking at where is Mercury retrograde, in what elements. So he's water, then air, then earth, and then fire. So I'll touch on that towards the end. I haven't really delved deep into that at all, but a little bit. I'm bringing other modalities, and one other, I think it's one other. And that is Gene Keys by Richard Rudd, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But so it's a human design, but an up-level version, I like to call it like that because I feel like that about it. And essentially there are 64 archetypes in human design, and each archetype takes up about 3 or 4 degrees of a sign, within a sign, right? And Venus stations retrograde at an archetype number 45 3 times. She doesn't have to, meaning it's significant, basically. She didn't have to. She could have slipped. She could have been at the last minute and then the next retrograde to be out of that number, if you like. But no, she's making that point 3 times, and it's a big point. Okay, I think I'm done with this slide. Now, the way I like to do it is the way I like things to be presented to me, and the way I like to present to others is I like to give you the ending. So you don't have to worry, be full of suspense, and just enjoy the ride. Don't worry about the ending. I'll tell you the ending now so you can just, like I say, enjoy the ride. So first I'd like you to, take a Post-it note, stamp it on your wall to keep coming back to this sentence. A quote. Now, it's from a Pluto in Gemini. Now, he happens to be Franz Kafka, so I suspect you know presumably who he is. Anyways, novelist. But he's a Pluto in Gemini. Remember, Pluto, I go to Pluto to understand the depth, the truth, the why beneath the why, the bottom line of Gemini, right? I love this quote. All language is but a poor translation, right? So I'll leave you with that, and then, keep that in mind. So the conclusion, what I will then unpack for you is a little bit of something I'll read out to you. Meaning is unstable. Language is self-referential, and separation is critical for our incarnation and individuation. Language is a tool for communicating our deeper, private, and intimate selves to others is redundant and reductive. And yet, for centuries, we've been entangled in this futile relational dynamic of trying to understand and be understood. Why? To understand is to stand in the liminal space between what is said and what is heard. But to accept this, we need to accept this unbridgeable gap, the complete and irrevocable separation between each other. And then use that complete separation to cultivate our wholeness, our individuality. If the rhetoric of the age of Pisces had us all chanting, "We are all one," the Aquarian age mantra is, "We are all individuals, indivisible, whole." Because this is exactly the ticket we are asked to pay if we are to enter and thrive in the age of Aquarius. And yet we're struggling greatly because separation triggers our original wound of rejection. This is our longest and darkest shadow. Ironically, this rejection is only unbearable because of our meaning-making model. We assume we are rejected when we interpret unfavorably an intended meaning of another person. But remember, all language is but a poor translation. Therefore, it is futile to ever expect that our intended meaning will be known. Instead, let's use language purely for self-expression, without the need to feel understood and known. Let's just be content and satisfied with just being seen and heard. Let's just display ourselves like artwork in a gallery and leave the interpretation to others. Their interpretation of us is not our responsibility. We need to accept that the only purpose other people have in our lives is to reflect us back to us. Or as Jeffrey Wolf Green puts it, Pluto in Gemini, people, need relationships to process themselves. In other words, Gemini engages with others, not to understand those others, but to understand himself or herself. So, what I want to now, I want to unpack all this for you, obviously, but just before I do that, I just want you to kind of to summarize it in a sense, even more so. What I'm essentially doing, two things. I'm taking that the Venus retrograde in Gemini is the deal breaker here for me, at least, is the key. But I'm splitting it in the sense that Gemini is the message. This is what we need to hear. And Venus, is the messenger, but in a sense that she's, in fact, probably not even the messenger, but she shows us how to do it, how to actually implement this message. So those are my two things I'm playing with, I'm going with, if you like. Retrograde is obviously that something is being repeated. In addition, that we have to revisit it and all that, but it's essentially repetition for me here. So to unpack. So I'm looking at what is the wound of Gemini? What is the Gemini shadow? And to understand what that is, what's the most painful thing about language? I look at Chiron in Gemini because Gemini to me is language. In this instance, that's how I'm taking it. I'm reducing it down to just language, which I think is far from just. It's like everything, but which will be hopefully apparent towards the end or by the end. So let me just read this out to you. So to understand what hurts Gemini the most, archetype. This doesn't mean sun in Gemini or anything in Gemini. This is just Gemini as an archetype. I'm quoting here Melanie Reinhardt from her book Chiron and the Healing Journey. So with Chiron in Gemini, there is often a discrepancy between our concept of our ability to communicate and the way we come across to others. Communicating our ideas may be difficult. We often feel that we have not really said what we wanted to say, and frustration results. So I want to illustrate how this shadow creation works and how Pluto comes into that. Here the truth is, this is the truth of language. And with Chiron, we feel that truth painfully because that truth has been rejected by the world around us, and why it's been rejected here, because it's hard to live well. We have never had a good model, or we have not learned any better to live, but really live, like actually, you know, live like we mean like we really understand that language, we cannot really understand each other. There's always that sense that we have not really said what we wanted to say, and therefore whoever was receiving our message really didn't get exactly what we said. So that's hard to live like that. So that's why this becomes a shadow, because we reject it. We just want certainty. We want definitions. We want clarity. We want to know. We want to, you know, understand each other, but also everything else, but certainly each other. But why do I know this is truth? Because Chiron is pain. Pain doesn't equate truth. It's your truth of that pain, but it's not the truth of that concept, that idea, in this case, language and Gemini. How do I know that's true? At least that's my deduction model. Is I go to Pluto in Gemini, the language bottom line. So before I play this and tell you a little bit about this, I just want you to, okay, I need to probably tell you a little bit about this guy. So this is a film, like a sort of a documentary, but not like a film, about Wittgenstein. He's a famous philosopher, again, turn of the 19th century, early 20th. He's famous for, basically, he's a philosopher's philosopher. So bear in mind, Pluto in Gemini, right? The bottom line of language. What's the bottom line? What's the truth of language, about language? So he's not a philosopher that ever bothered to debate or even philosophize or consider the philosophical concepts we're all familiar with, like what's the purpose of life? What's the beauty? What's art? What's, you know, soul, identity? I don't know, you name it. Evil, good, blah, blah. No, he was not interested in that. He was only questioning and interested in questioning the questions. Yeah, never fails to make me chuckle. So he turned philosophy upside down. He said philosophy is futile and ridiculous because the questions are being asked. You're posing a problem and then you go trying to solve it. Well, you posed the problem and you created it. So you can't solve it because you created it. Anyway, I'm trying to explain Wittgenstein, and let me just show you this. But I just wanted to say that he's about language. His whole life is dedicated to get to the bottom of language and how we actually communicate and how we create problems in doing so. But so when a scholar of Wittgenstein, to illustrate the Pluto in Gemini here, talks about Wittgenstein, he says, an attempt to summarize Wittgenstein's work would be neither successful nor useful. Wittgenstein compressed his thoughts to the point where further compression is impossible. Now, if there's ever a definition of Pluto in Gemini, I think this is it. I mean, Pluto strips everything to its absolute essence, to the point that no stone is unturned. You get to that bottom line. So that's this guy. And I'm going to play this as this expands the story a little bit, like a clip. So.
A dog cannot lie. Neither can he be sincere. A dog may be expecting his master to come. Why can't he be expecting him to come next Wednesday? Is it because he doesn't have language? If a lion could speak, we would not be able to understand what he said. Why do I say such a thing?
If we could understand him, I shouldn't think we'd have too much trouble with a lion.
We could get an interpreter. Do you mean for me or for the lion? Yes, we could get an interpreter. But what possible use would that be? To imagine a language is to imagine a form of life. It's what we do and who we are that gives meaning to our words. I can't understand a lion's language because I don't know what his world is like.
Okay, so hopefully you heard this. I'm not sure how the sound works with this video, but basically, again, I always chuckle because no one can summarize Wittgenstein. But anyway, so he's saying he's identifying the nature of language, which is that it's hermeneutic, in the sense that we use words to describe how we use words that we have agreed that have a meaning, but at the moment we agreed on that meaning, we had reduced and taken away our own individual interpretation of that meaning. So to use language to describe your individuality that you don't want to communicate to another, it's reductive, it's an impossibility, it's a fallacy, it's a, a futile attempt and a cause of so much heartache and pain in relationships. So I'll assume I clarified this enough, and I'll leave, oh, sorry, I don't know if I actually said this, so if there are any questions, I'll take them at the end. Mercury and Gemini need to kind of keep on track here. So hopefully I made this clear. Now, it's a Venus. So this is a Gemini that I hopefully have just checking my notes. Yeah, that's good. So this is the message that language is, by its nature, impossible to use to communicate our deeper, intimate, private selves. And where do we want to do that? In relationships. I mean, you go to a baker, you don't want to share yourself to that level. This is a relationship problem. So Venus is then how we solve this problem. Like, how do we not turn this truth into a shadow? So heal the Chiron wound by living the truth that language is like this. And Venus is going to show us how we do that. So I call her self-referential Venus, partly because of this language whole thing, but also because she's a Taurian Venus. She's a Venus pandemos. Here comes another COVID-19 metaphor. So why is she Taurian Venus? In 2020, she rules Uranus in Taurus. In 2028, Saturn in Taurus. In 2036, Mercury in Taurus. And in 2044, Neptune in Taurus. Other than in 2044, where we have Mars in Libra, and I'm not looking at the last quarter square, the other three key points in the Pluto-Saturn phasal relationships, there is no planet in Libra. They're only in Taurus. Therefore, she only rules Taurus. Now, a few things about Taurus, and I'm a double Taurus with Saturn in Taurus. So I'm mastering Taurus archetype this lifetime, amongst a few other things. And so the path of Taurus is the Buddhist path. Now, I know it sounds a bit big, and I think Buddha is Taurus, I think. But anyway, I'm not claiming that's a fact. But what I mean by that is that Taurus's journey is about ending suffering for it, him, herself, but also showing the world maybe how to do it too, by it, like our contribution to this mission and vision, to end suffering, is that the source of pleasure isn't outside of us. So yes, we have desires, and we can reach out outside, whether it's food, whether it's a person, whether it's a handbag or anything else you have pleasure getting, and it's externalized. And Taurus's kind of shadow is that he gets attached to these things, and he just thinks, without that, I'm not going to have that sensation, that satisfaction, that pleasure, right? But the lesson, the evolved Taurus, if you like, is to know, to experience and to know that is actually in you, that very pleasure. And I'll give you just this one little thing. Why do we think that something will give a certain pleasure and we head for it, whatever that is, right? Because we have that feeling of pleasure. Why else would we want something if we didn't know what it was going to give us? Do you see? So we already have the experience of the pleasure. We just think that's going to give it to us. But we already have created it in us to recognize that it will exist, but we then associate it with something, someone, or whatever. See the conundrum? Hopefully you do. So the job of Taurus is to resolve that and to bring everything back to itself, that everything, and I'm quoting here J.W. Green, self-reliance, it's an evolutionary desire and need to develop self-reliance, self-sufficiency, and I'm adding self-worth, self-love, and most importantly, self-pleasure. So everything comes back to it, her, him, because the source of all these experiences and sensations and pleasures and joys and all that is in you. The objects of desires just point you what you want to experience. You don't need the object of desire to actually merge with or do anything with. You just use it as a pointer to come back to yourself and experience the feeling and on your own or with yourself or whatever. Okay, so hopefully I'm being clear so far. This is, now let me tell you about the story between Venus in Gemini, meaning Venus and Mercury or Hermes and Aphrodite. So Hermes and Aphrodite had a boy called Hermaphroditus, very uncreatively given the name. It was a pretty boy and he was wandering around the woods as they did. And this nymph, I don't know how to pronounce her name, Salmacis. So she saw him, fell in love deeply, desires him, as you can see from the painting. And it's actually, I mean, if anyone knows different, I'd love to hear at the end. I think it's the only myth where the woman is a rapist or the abductor or the perpetrator or the one that forces herself onto the other. Anyway, I don't have any thoughts on that one yet, but I thought it was interesting. So she just doesn't want to let go of him. She just wants him so much. She can't bear for him to ever leave. I don't think he feels the same, but nevertheless, Zeus allows for this to happen, as in he allows the merging, well, not allows, let her have him, basically. And so they become one, and this is the end result. Hermaphroditus now is both men and woman, male, female. So this is meant to be a female body and face, and this is meant to be male genitalia. So to me, this is a story of the self-pleasure principle, or how we think it's in the other person, but really it's within us, that pleasure, right? That we are seeking others to satisfy or things to satisfy for us. Now, this, sorry, let me just kind of mention here if I haven't, this idea of what we consider the source of external pleasure for us is another sex. So this is heterosexual story, so I'm aware of that, and we have gone past that stage in our human evolution, but bear with me. So the point is that we think this external sex will give us the pleasure. So this is about sex, as in sexual pleasure at this point, in terms of two sexes, male, female. And so this is Hermes and Aphrodite. But the same story is repeated in the retrograde Venus. So Venus retrograde has the same story. So, and this is from Erin Sullivan's Retrograde Planets. She quotes someone, Bruce Schofield, not sure who the person is, doesn't matter. So retrograde Venus is both male and female, is the conclusion. And the story paraphrased by me here, so it's a quote, but it's a paraphrased quote. It is during the retrograde phase that Venus, according to Aztec mythology, takes the form of a man and walks the earth. Here, he meets the goddess of love and he couples with her. A game is then played in the underworld. Venus loses and he must be sacrificed to the sun. But ultimately, Venus is reborn as morning star and female. So I'm just going to leave that there. And as another example of how this Venus in Gemini, Hermes Aphrodite, retrograde is 2 in 1. The principle of self-pleasure. Sorry, let me just take a sip of water. Okay. Same message, different messenger. So as I said at the beginning, I'll be looking at this other modality, human design or gene keys. It's like I say, it's merged into one. Gene keys is combining a few other things like quantum mechanics, physics, and genetics. This is why I find it so much more powerful. So these are those 64 archetypes, the I Ching. If anyone knows much about I Ching, you will recognize probably these little symbols. And they all correspond to an archetype. So there are 64 of them, 64 archetypes, a lot. They're basically, archetypes we in astrology also talk about. We just condense them in 12 and all that. So remember, I brought this in because Venus stations retrograde at the same archetype in terms of gene keys. And that's here, 45. Yeah, this is Gemini, as you can see. Now, so she's reiterating this message 3 times. Now, for the higher frequency, so the gene keys work like you have a shadow expression, gift, and siddhi. So shadow is Chiron, Pluto stuff. Gift is Uranus, so it's an emancipated version. And siddhi is Neptune. So I'm usually kind of happy with the Uranus or gift expression, meaning the other one I'm not even aspiring to, but I'll probably bring in some with here. So for the higher frequency of this archetype, and that means Uranus and Neptune as well, but Uranus, for the higher frequency of this archetype to be activated, alchemized, and manifested in the world and our being, as in our bodies and our humanity, we need to be working to embody the higher frequency of the gene key 6. Now, gene key 6 is here. That's, by the way, my natal Pluto and Jupiter. And so what this is saying, at least the way I understand it, is that in order for this to be reaching its highest frequency, we need to be parallel. In fact, this is the activator. This is the, I'll leave it at that. This is the activating agent, this gene key 6. But what I found beautiful is that that's a 3rd decan of Virgo, and it's ruled by Taurian, Venus, and Mercury. I mean, you can't make these things up. I don't know. I just love these connections and queens, or I don't know what to call them, just connections, right? Okay, so let me tell you about the gene key 45. In fact, first about 6. So like I say, the alchemical agent for the mutation of our biology, essential for activating the higher frequency of the gene key 45, is gene key 6. The shadow of gene key 6 is conflict. And the oldest conflict, hot-wired into our genetics, is the conflict between male and female. That's the whole point of this gene key 6. To bring an end to all conflict, to raise our vibration and establish peace on earth, as well as our own internal peace, we have to give up our sexual attractions. Hence the title of this slide, The Future of Pleasure is Sexless. So this is not just about sex and pleasure and self-pleasure and all the stuff that I brought up in the last few minutes, but it's also about language. What I mean by that is that how we take language for granted, how we misuse it and abuse it. I'm not going to go into the intentions because I don't know, as I just kind of argued that it's an unknown. But what I want to highlight here is that what I see, and I certainly am a living example of that too, hopefully far less than I was, work in progress and all that, but I still see it in many and too much still in the world, where in one breath we are saying we want peace in the world, let's say, because it's relevant for this particular point here. And I'm assuming that most of us would agree with that, or rather would have that sentiment and feeling that we do want to end all wars and all conflict and have peace, right? I would assume that's true, right? And yet, if let's say you took this to as serious as I do, to then know that if you were to achieve that, we need to reach a point where of what pleasure is sexless, yeah, to actually give up our sexual attractions. And by that, what it means to what I just talked about, you don't look for them externally, you don't look to others to give you those pleasures. Would you give it up? I had a post on my Instagram page some time ago. Would you give up sex and art for world peace? And but I have an argument, which I'm not going to bring into this presentation, that art will actually be phenomenally better and higher than any we've ever seen yet. Sex will be dead. Sex as we know it, like with people. Sorry. So my point here with language is that we say one thing, but when it comes down to it, if we need to then do what it needs to, what will make that happen, we might struggle and not, and just all of a sudden, have a memory loss that we actually ever said anything or meant that thing, and we'll act in a way that will prevent this other thing we said we want. Yeah. So this is the kind of, if nothing else, this Venus in Gemini retrograde, if this is all too far out for you out there, for you meaning whoever's listening to now and in the future, then maybe just consider that you align your life with your language. But I'll come to that later. Okay, so that point here is done. Now, this gene key 45, and this is again where I find beauty. So you'll see this is very much Capricorn, and yet it's a Gemini archetype. But anyway, so gene key 45, this is a kind of a backstory to it, or the shadow expression of it. We humans discovered it by staying in one place. And because this is genetics, it's about our memory, genetic memory, our cellular memory. This is another reason why I love gene keys. So we discovered that by staying in one place and growing food, we had better chances of survival. This was the beginning of civilized hierarchy and control as power. Whoever controlled the food resources had the power. Sounds familiar? The system we created keeps us working within the hierarchy because the hierarchy feeds us. And our primary commitments to feeding ourselves is to feeding ourselves and our families. In other words, tribal thinking still dominates over collective thinking, and family loyalties far outweigh any other bonds. But this is the shadow expression of gene key. This is our memory, cellular memory of how things have been done centuries and centuries and millennia and lifetimes over lifetimes. So the point I'm making is this is something we need to integrate, need to overcome, need to rise above, need to move away from, evolve from. However, our isolation into blood families is the very boundary that human beings will have to break through if a new mode of thinking and living is to emerge into the world. Now, if this isn't how we move from Saturn to Uranus or from Capricorn to Aquarius, I don't know what is. And yet we are in the 45 gene key, which is the Gemini where Venus stations retrograde. Remember that. But we fear this because we are still operating from the shadow expression of the gene key 45. This shadow does not allow us to transcend family blood ties. Our loyalty is confined to our immediate family. Even though we are witnessing a demise of the traditional family model currently in our world, with a built-in model of patriarchal hierarchy, this is still frightening to so many people. So, why it's so beautiful that this gene key, where she turns retrograde, stations retrograde 3 times at these critical points, is in Gemini, and yet it's actually talking about Capricorn. It's in Capricorn language. I love because on that 23rd of June, the first quarter square, and if I haven't clarified this or rather brought up, first quarter square is a first reality check. So whatever we planted at the new phase in the dark of the new moon will now be tested. Have we fed it well? Have we nurtured it well? Have we looked after it well? So when it starts sprouting, but it's still frail, will it be strong enough in its nutrients and its constitution to survive the weather, the sun, and whatever? So that's the metaphor. So this first quarter square is critical. And so 23rd of June, 2028, what happens as well, in addition to everything I spoke to you about now and all this Gemini activity, Uranus, Venus, Mercury, Mars, and etc., we'll have North Node will be at 23 degrees Capricorn, 1 orb away from the Saturn-Pluto conjunction at 22 Capricorn we just had. Again, I find this meaningful, significant. Second piece to this is that Chiron will make a whole square to it, a wide square, a wide square, and out of sign, but it's a wide square. I think it's 8 degrees, I think. Maybe a bit more, I'm not sure now, but yeah. But before then, they will be actually making an exact square before this 23rd of June. And in 2020, Chiron was also square in the same nodal axis, Capricorn Cancer. But most beautifully and importantly, on both occasions, Capricorn node was and is the resolution node. So, but the fact that it's south and north is the beautiful reversal. But this is, by the way, sorry if I, again, haven't said it. It's a reverse nodal return, which is essentially a call for integration. But you don't ever integrate just that sign, you integrate the whole axis, but okay, that might not be for this presentation. Back to this particular thing, meaning. What does it mean? We need to have courage, this is my conclusion. We need to have courage to feel the pain of rejection and the grief of separation in order to individuate. So back to that 45 gene key I was reading earlier, move from Saturn to Aquarius. We need to have courage to feel the pain of rejection and grief of separation, and to pass through that in order to individuate, to enter into Aquarian age. Now, when I was drawing all this and doodling months ago, I was, obviously, as we all have been looking at, so we have end of Piscean age, Uranus as in Aquarian age, and Pluto-Saturn conjunction as the initiator. I drew it like this, and I just was all of a sudden arrested by the image because I recognize it as something else. So I don't know if you're already picking up on this or not. But this order, Neptune, Saturn, Pluto, Uranus, is the order of Stanislav Grof's perinatal matrices, and Tanas, who then related them to the archetypes. So what Grof was talking about, rather, to begin with, was that as we are being born out of a mother's womb, I mean, I'm no mother myself, so forgive me if my language is a bit off. I have no experience. So as we are getting born out of our mother's womb, Neptune, amniotic fluid, just basically liquid fluid, right? Neptune, water archetype and all that, the womb, the collective womb. So we are coming out, the contractions start, Saturn, and then this fetus, now pretty big, is now having to be squeezed through a birth canal, which is quite narrow. And so this initial phase of like pushing into the canal is Saturn, because it's just the sense of contractions and limits and suffocation, depression, literal, physical. And then it goes through the canal where it meets Pluto. That's Pluto sphere, if you like. And then the birth is Uranian. It's a shock of birth, and it's freedom, and it's individuation, or it's in separation from the mother, right? But what I love, well, at this point, I just want to say I'm not making light of this, of course, whatsoever. This is all metaphor speaking, but of light of the COVID and what it created in the world, all the pain and grief, and so not whatsoever making light of that. But I'm looking at this, like I said at the beginning, metaphorically, symbolically, and essentially what we're experiencing now is, unless we can breathe on our own, we don't stand good chances of surviving. So if you look back at this picture and consider the matrices and the birth and the archetype of Uranus, Aquarian age, that it's about breathing, but as a way of you have separated now from your mother and you're on your own, I find, as I say it, I just actually kind of emotional almost. I feel that's the call, that's the essence, that's the message of the coronavirus. However horrifically awful and painful it is, and it is. I mean, I'm lucky that no one I know and closely enough is all good, meaning, yeah. So anyway, now back to, so that's corona relevance and metaphor. Important. However, let's go back to the actual birth and why. Sorry, I'm slightly, I just want to, yeah. Why Capricorn is where he's at. So Chiron, as I put it here, Chiron is the midwife of the Aquarian age. So Chiron orbits between Saturn and Uranus. And I can never remember that lady's name, the author of Barbara Claw, I think. Chiron, the bridge. Anyway, forgive me. But it's where I first heard of that kind of bridge between the two, and it's a bridge of consciousness, I think she calls it. So between Saturn and Uranus, it orbits literally just between those two planets. So Chiron is birthing us into the Aquarian age. How is it doing that? So, I don't know, I like this thing here. You might find it amusing, I do. Rejection, separation, tomato, tomato, it's all the same thing. Meaning, and this is a good example of, illustrating this point that are the same. So being ejected out of the body of our mother, where we had this blissful existence, and then extrapolate that to a higher level of just spirit and us being born into the body as souls, right? All of that and the shock of that birth is experienced as a form of rejection, right? I would say. And it's a separation, or rather separation is experienced as rejection. So if we are to move from Saturn to Uranus, from Capricorn to Aquarius, or into the Aquarian age, we need to be okay with rejection and separation. But what I think we have been struggling for so long, and it's time now, language, to reframe that. So let me quote, to start with this quote of Taunas. With the integration of Saturn, one is oneself, the origin of one's own definition. Actually, I'll come back to that. The Saturn principle, this is Ren Butler, one of my absolute favorite books in the world, The Archetypal Universe, FYI, just a note to self there. The Saturn principle is at the root of all apparent separateness in the world. Although this limiting and defining process is essential in the act of creation, the loss of the unitive state leads to profound feelings of pain and a deep longing to regain the lost wholeness. But that's the point. So, point one, whenever I read this paragraph, and I read it so many times, I mean, my Saturn is in 12th, so I had to grapple with this big time. It's a fear of incarnation. You just don't want to incarnate. It's so nice in that 12th house. It really is. It's heavenly. But back to this particular quote, and the point of coming into this body is to separate, to have a form. Body is a form, separates us from the environment. So when I read this quote, every time I actually feel like a parent, although I said I'm not a parent, but I have many nieces and nephews, of a teenager who doesn't want to leave the house, and it's like 19 now. Okay, you need to go and make your own living in life. I can't support you anymore. I feel like that when I read this. It's like, okay, up to a point we can, it's hard maybe to leave home and leave parents and leave whatever we nurtured us and supported us, but there comes a time when that is the whole point of our existence, to be our own. So language, this sense of lost wholeness, because we were whole within that unit or that something else that we came from, right? And we just don't want to let go. We are stuck to it. There is another kind of wholeness, language, right? This is not the only wholeness. There is another wholeness. That's the individuated wholeness. Language, individual, indivisible, whole. You're not to be divided. You're whole. Being an individual means to be whole. So I'm reminding everyone, should anyone need reminding, to rethink this whole thing. Because we need to do Saturn well, which is why Capricorn is where it's at with this reverse nodal axis I just showed you earlier. If we are to move to Uranus. So if we are to bridge this, Chiron, right? If we don't do Saturn, if we don't do Capricorn well, if we don't integrate Saturn, then we're gonna carry all kinds of debris into the Aquarian age, and then, I'm sure it will happen. But I'm just saying, the more we integrate Saturn, the better we will survive and function and thrive in the age of Aquarius. And that is how we do. We just separate and withstand that pain, that grief that comes with that. And I speak from deepest experience here. And also the pain of rejection. And I'm also speaking from greatest experience here. What gold and what power and empowerment comes from doing that? and in astrological terms, Aquarian age and all that, is how we prepare ourselves. It's how this plant that we planted at a new phase, if we nurture it now, by the time we have the reality check, we will be strong to survive. Now, just a little side point, I just came to me and I might as well share it. I'm really not big on this stuff, but I thought it was kind of, because there's this prediction I've seen about this pandemic. Someone predicted, some psychic years ago, and they were right about the timing for this one. But what I remember, and it stuck with me, and I was like a buzzing and nagging noise, that it will come back in 10 years. And like I say, I'm really not big on prediction in general and all this, like that kind of stuff, really not. But yeah, something about the fact that it was right this time, and we have this, it's 2028 when we have a quarter square, the big test, which is about 2 years prior to this 10. Just leaving it out there on the table, do what you want with it. I kind of threw it, but then it comes back occasionally. Now, sorry, just remembering where I'm going next. After all this, I'm back to Venus to show you, in my view, how Venus actually is a beautiful, beautiful archetype to show us how to be with these painful, difficult emotions of rejection and separation. So Venus is retrograde in particular, because that's the one we're looking at here. She is, she makes the five-point star, as I drew it here. And when I was looking at that, I was like, actually, these are inconjuncts. Okay, Leo and Aries are trine, but all the rest are inconjuncts. Now, what I'm interested in, that each time, this time, these 4 points that I'm talking about, particularly the first 3 of Venus retrograde, right, across this span of time, she comes before, in Gemini, she comes before Scorpio, and the next Venus retrograde is in Capricorn. So I'm looking at that in conjunct. I have to kind of narrow it down to a point. So I don't know if this is me, whether I came up with this or I heard it from some of the speakers on this platform. So I'm so sorry if I'm not crediting you correctly. But I can't remember whatsoever if I heard it or if it was my invention. But I view and feel such a strong affinity with this particular explanation, description of in conjunction, I mean. I have a Saturn Uranus. It's the only exact orb in my whole chart, Saturn Uranus in conjunct. So again, I'm from experience. Is the 2 that are in conjunct are like oil and water. And the reason I settled with this when I discovered it, when it came to me, like I said, I'm not sure which way, was like, oh my God, at last I know now, I can breathe with this. Because I always heard it talked about, you know, traditionally, typically, as an adjustment, like you have to adjust. Well, that sounds to me like a balance that you do with opposition. So opposition is like you keep, it's never a static thing, the balance, you never find it. Well, you find it and then it slips, just like language and meaning. But basically it's motion, yeah? And you keep adjusting. Oh, now a bit more of this, now a bit more of that. But in conjunct is like, I don't know if you can see me. You know, it's, well, it's this basically. No, that's not the best example. So Aries is here. The natural in conjunct is Virgo. Libra would be parallel, opposite, I mean. But Virgo is the one that's wonky up down here, and Scorpio is the other one that's wonky up here. There is no adjusting. I don't feel at all. It's actually, you just stabilize them so that they stand in this awkward position together. And the you know, oil and water image here is just so perfect example of how that works and why it's so Aquarian in the sense of Aquarian age. So both, they don't fuse. There is no fusion. There's no third entity that becomes and we become one and we are all, you know, merged together and all that. No, we remain individuals, indivisible, but together, but not impinging on each other, not sticking to each other, not poking into each other and all the rest. So I absolutely love that, and I feel that's such an Aquarian aspect, maybe. The new, I don't know, the trine of the age of Aquarius, although trines are boring. Anyway, I'm being silly. I'm a Mercury in Gemini. So there's that example or illustration of this inconjunct, and which is the Venus pattern, right? So the pattern's beautiful because it's inconjunct. You get that? So, and then the way I always describe how I see work, shadow work, as in integrated shadow integrated, right? How do you know that you've done a good job in integrating your shadow? In my world and in my view, it isn't about merging, fusing, bringing light to it and become all this like complete person. Yes, I'm complete, whole, but I'm not smooth, I'm not round, I'm not, perfect or something. I am like this. And I love this because it's an actual artwork. So it's an artwork. People, I don't know how much, billions of dollars are paid for this painting. Picasso, sorry, by the way, I didn't credit him at the bottom. It's about making yourself visible to yourself first and foremost. You don't bring all of yourself to everything and everyone because that's just irrelevant and you don't, no need. But to yourself, you become wholly visible, and then you look like that because there was a shadow decades old for people like myself in our 50s. The younger ones might look different because there will be softer, younger shadows, meaning things that we have not neglected for so long. Although I'd like to think that I have not neglected mine for long either. But so some will be, wonkier, rustier, looking rotten, looking all kinds of things. So, but they'll be you. So you just make them visible. You see them and you put them there and you put them there and wherever, and you look like that. Okay, I'm nearly done. Okay, so I want to show you, offer what I believe is a great way of integrating this Scorpio, dancing this dance, right? Artfully doing it. So Scorpio Gemini in conjunct is, Scorpio is like, I think probably are the two archetypes that are just like not great with each other on conventional level, a shadow level, whatever, is that Scorpio is all about mystery and depth and darkness and, well, not necessarily darkness, but power and control and it's like terrified of Gemini. It's like if I say anything of my depth and secret and like this secret knowledge, yeah, it's just going to blabber out and it's just going to not have any filters, just going to say, and that's a trickster. That's the energy that is, don't take yourself too seriously. You just gave me this and it's not on you anymore what I do with what you just shared with me. So Scorpio won't necessarily share that with Gemini. This is all archetypes. This is not about Sun Scorpio or Gemini's Sun or whatever. I mean, that too maybe, but yeah. So how do they live happily together? They make mystery obvious. The depth therefore becomes surface, but it's depth. So that kind of paradox becomes the joy and the beauty of Scorpio Gemini integrated. So something to ponder. I'll come to this painting in a moment, but something to ponder for anyone who's tickled by this. What understandings and interpretations of yourself or of your world or anything are you trying to control? If so, and this would be a Scorpio shadow, not really gelling well with Gemini. So again, within you, not with someone. That too maybe, but within you. And this painting, so this is a Sun in Scorpio, but Pluto in Gemini. I just love it. And it's René Magritte, and famous again, surrealist from the same era of Wittgenstein. I think he's a bit younger, maybe not, I'm not sure. The painting is essentially, I can't do French, I'm sorry, but this means, the painting is called the treachery of images, but the actual words here says in a pipe something. It basically means this is not a pipe. So the irony, the paradox, the beauty, the depth and the shallowness brought together is that, I don't know for you, but when I first seen it and every time even since, it never loses its that moment of novelty, Gemini, but the depth of that meaning, Scorpio. So this is not a pipe. What do you mean this is not a pipe? And it's not a pipe in the sense that it's a painting of a pipe, therefore it's not a pipe. Anyway, I find that doing that exact thing, depth, surface, mystery, obvious. Gemini, Scorpio, coming together happily ever after. So let me see how I want to do this. Okay, I'll play this first. So I don't know, you may recognize them already. So two comedians. This one is Venus in Gemini, and this one is Venus in Capricorn. Seinfeld, Jerry Seinfeld, and Steve Harvey. So I'll enjoy this. This is beautiful.
I love to talk about comedy. I love to break down why I'm doing this bit this way, why I put that line here and not over here. Do you think I could teach that as a course? Do you think it's teachable? Nah, man. Why? If you explain it to them, it will make no sense. This is the most senseless profession on earth. I was born with this eyeball that sees everything different. Tragedy strikes. Right. I got news for you. We have the jokes that night. Now we know that we can't bring this to the public yet because we'll get hammered. But in the room alone, when it's just us, we have the jokes already ready.
So I hope you enjoyed that. That's just, yeah. If you're a Capricorn, heavy Capricorn, and you struggle with Gemini, archetype, lightness, trickstery energy and all that, I'd highly recommend this. It's Comedians in Cars Having Coffee, Jerry Seinfeld's program on Netflix, and he invites comedians, and it's actually very in-depth and it's amazing. Most of them, some are less, but yeah, I would recommend that to kind of practice how you integrate the conjunct between Capricorn and Gemini. But so this is kind of my summary of it. So Capricorn Gemini reality check. You cannot teach nonsensical. And this is beautiful for me because it's not about Saturn being the restrictor. Oh, Saturn limits and it's all bad when it limits. No, it's a reality. That's where he ends. It doesn't devalue what he ends. It just ends it, meaning it's nonsensical. It's beautiful that it's nonsensical, but you can't teach nonsensical. Reality check. Beautiful. Beautiful Saturn or Capricorn. Not restrictive, not a bad guy, right? Your understanding is not my responsibility. Again, if you take one thing away from this, if you enjoyed it or whatever, but this is it, please. Your understanding is not my responsibility, as in, yeah. And this is a big piece, actually. This is a big, big one, meaning, so I wrote it here, maybe, yeah. There is not most eloquently, but I'll elaborate quickly. There is no freedom of self-expression without taking full responsibility for our own biases. So I again speak deeply from personal experience. There are some comedians, and my life partner, I'm a Gemini Mercury, and he's a Mercury Capricorn, and he's taught me what comedy is in a most profound sense. And so he would just go to the edges and listen to comedy that I would be, oh, that's a bit too close to the bone. And then I just wouldn't listen to it. Because I suppose my Uranus conjunct South Node, I don't know, but I always felt like it's just wrong to request someone not to freely express themselves and express something that gives them joy. My boundary, my kind of line not to be crossed is if no life is being directly affected, no one died as because someone killed them, you know what I mean? Hopefully, yeah. Anything else, what's the problem? I take responsibility for my bias. My bias is that something is just a bit too not for joking for me because I'm too much in pain or something about the topic. Okay, so hopefully I explained that well. And yeah, nearly done. So this is a piece that I said I was going to touch on briefly on Mercury, which is basically because Venus retrograde in Gemini answers to Mercury retrograde in these elements. So so what I'm offering here is something to journal, something to ponder, something to think about. So in water, sorry, I need my glasses. So in water, so in 2020, Mercury will be retrograding in water signs as Venus is retrograding in Gemini. So we have emotions because we give them language and meaning. So my question to you would be, what meaning, and to myself certainly, I'll be journaling on all this, what meaning do you assign to your emotional hurts and rejections? And how you can maybe reframe that and rethink that. In 2028, Mercury will be retrograde in air, in the air element. So the point of other people is to reflect you back to you. How are you using your relationships to better understand yourself? So beautifully, this is, well, it's air, it's Gemini, and it will be retrograding in Gemini, and Venus will be in Gemini retrograding that year. And like I said at the very beginning, the Gemini archetype only engages with others so they understand himself, not to understand others. And that's a shadow of Gemini, because then other people are like, oh, but you didn't listen to me, to Gemini, person or archetype. Like, oh, you don't understand, oh, but because that's not what they're about. That's not the soul's evolutionary intention and desire. And in 2036, it will be an Earth element. And so this is the important one, really, I feel the most important. The language you choose to speak to yourself and others creates your external reality vibrationally and therefore potentially materially, which in turn contributes to the reality of the world at large. Basically, you have a responsibility. We all have this responsibility. So how responsibly are you using language to manifest a better world? Okay, and I'm done. So let me just give you this last piece. I don't know if I need this, probably not. So yeah, this is where you can find me. My name is Maya, you may have forgotten. So this is my website. All of this will be there, but I can just briefly tell you. So if you'd like to work with me, follow me on Instagram to stay informed of all my special offerings, which I post regularly on Instagram. So at Darker Materials with the underscore there, but go to my website, you'll find it there as well. Or you can email me as well at herdarkermaterials@gmail.com to join my mailing list and be the first to hear about my upcoming course, which at the moment I wrote here Astrology for Shadow Work, but I'm still, I'm working on it, and it might be a bit bigger and it might be much more reflective of what I shared here. So if this intrigued you and sparked your curiosity and inspired you, motivated you, excited you, then yeah, I mean, I'd love to have you on my course. So let me know, drop me an email and I'll keep you in the loop. And I'm also creating some free resources, which I'll be making available via email subscription. So yeah, that's that. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Maya. That was incredible. Very different and very enjoyable. Okay, we do have one question for you. Let me just... oh, yeah, that's a good idea, yes. So, Sue, would you please go ahead? Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I can go actually without... Oh, no, carry on. Sorry, Sue. Sorry, Sue.
As I understand synergy, it comes when one is able to integrate oneself and acknowledge that the pain and abandonment is from within, focusing on the essential needs, a Venus quality. Are you saying that once we recognize this, the individuation occurs and one can feel whole and then integrate within the collective?
I do. Thank you for saying that. I really do. That's, meaning thank you for saying that. You see, I'm thinking the whole presentation is about how actually language can, fall short of being, translatable fully in understanding another. But yeah, I think what you're saying, I would say too.
And that was from Monica.
Oh, from Monica. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have a comment too. And that is that I noticed just recently that with the last two Venus retrogrades were the transits of Venus. And I noticed at that time that Neptune was also square the nodes as it is now. And I just wondered if you would like to comment on that.
Neptune is squaring nodes.
Which is coming about. I mean, it's getting...
Oh, I see. Yes, it's at 20, Neptune is at 20, and we just had nodes are still at 29. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the last two Venus retrogrades were transits of Venus. So they kind of started off, you know, the Venus transit, you know, 100-year cycle. And at that time, Neptune was square the nodes. The first time the resolution node, let me look. The resolution node was the south node, and then the other one was the north node. So it's kind of similar to what you were saying.
Okay, well, thank you. So
I know it's a big deal, so, you know.
No, of course, no. I mean, I'll happily offer my view. You know, it's just my view, right? So, because you're connecting it to Venus, right? I will too, even though you know it's not from this presentation, but it's I hear in that way. So I would go in this direction. So Neptune is the higher octave of Venus. And I have Venus in 12th again, and so I very much am familiar with the two archetypes coming together. And it's been, again, my own personal journey with this. And I was going to quote my partner, but I'm not. I don't think he'll appreciate that. So basically, why is Neptune a higher octave of Venus, or rather how that actually looks in real life, is that it's an impersonal connection. It's an impersonal love, because the love is bigger than the person. The vision that you have towards Venus kind of vision, as in, you know, the tunnel, channel, whatever, the connection, between you and the other is far bigger. So if you have Venus in connection with Neptune, or just Neptune, like I have Neptune in 7th as well, so that's a Venus archetype again, it's like I genuinely I see beyond. It's like I can't really settle. It is slippery in a kind of fluid sense to settle on a person's specifics day in, day out. It's like I cruise at this level that's just a bit beyond that. And this is not beyond in any hierarchical sense, better or not. So to wrap up, if Neptune is squaring nodes when Venus is retrograding, and sorry, actually, what were the nodes for last time? So this is Gemini, Sagittarius. What were the last time?
The last time was Taurus and Scorpio. Venus, Taurus and Scorpio.
Yeah, Venus. Well, that would be a separate story, meaning that, So, okay, but let me just kind of summarize, if I can, just Neptune squaring nodes, irrespective of what nodes are, when Venus is retrograde. So I would say that that's a call to not take relationships too personally. I know this is making it sound a bit too simple and not too Neptunian, not beautiful enough, but in a way, kind of not to take it personally, to develop that higher point, like a bird's eye view, if you like, of a person. And it's also about not attachment. It's also about fluidity. So you kind of merge, or rather you just kind of brush off each other. It's a bit of a dance. Neptune is dance, right? So the skip step is saying we haven't done enough of this, is how I look at the skip steps. And so let's kind of refine this archetype a bit more in our relationships, because it's Venus retrograde. And that archetype in relationships is saying, I mean, the shadow expression that we might see ourselves falling into each time is that we look to other to redeem us. That's the biggest signature of Neptune, to save us, for us to lose ourselves in, so we can just not worry about world and reality anymore. So that would be a tripping stone. But the evolved, or rather what we then work on, is to just dance with the other, but never get too Virgo, too detailed, too specific. I think I'm just gonna repeat myself. And as for the Taurus, what was there something else there about Taurus, Scorpio, and
That was the
the
2004.
nodes?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and what was Venus? What sign was Venus in at the time?
Gemini. They were both Gemini. That's what I'm saying. They were both transits.
Oh,
They were the transits of.
I'm so sorry. Of
No,
course
no
you are.
worries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. You mean this one now? Oh, sorry. It is 11 o'clock, almost midnight where I am.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of, I kind of threw you.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, give me a moment then, actually, because that kind of changes slightly. Well, I was going to include that, but I was just, time-wise. So this Wittgenstein guy that I quoted as being in the Pluto in Gemini, so you go to Pluto in Gemini to understand the truth of something, the bottom line of that archetype, i.e. Gemini language, right? He has Pluto conjunct Neptune. So my astrology by now, after almost 30 years of doing it and working with it, whatever, has gone outside of the kind of the orbs, the exactness of the technicalities and all that. I'm now in the far kind of fluid of waters or whatever when I, work with it. So this guy, Pluto-Neptune conjunction, and the whole of that generation had that, and they were both in Gemini. Pluto and Neptune were in Gemini. So it would actually reinforce, particularly this year around, the whole story that I've been sharing here with you. And actually to emphasize the importance of language, because, so this is why I'm taking this to be the case. When Pluto takes us to the essence of something, it strips of everything external and surplus that it's unnecessary, but just to get to the atomic level of something. So when someone has Pluto conjunct Neptune in that same sign, I archetype, I trust them with everything, that they have gotten to that core, that there's nothing left, no stone unturned about the truth of the archetype. And then they release it, and then in doing that, it's elevated on that spiritual highest expression of Neptune. It's like the ultimate wisdom of that archetype. So in a sense, this presentation very much ties in, from my perspective, with that. And as for, so she was in Gemini with, so she was retrograde in Gemini when the nodes were in Scorpio Taurus, right?
Yeah, both times. Yeah.
Well, I mean, might be just, yeah. So I'm basically just finding everything I just said kind of to tap into that or to echo that. So Venus this time around, I don't know about then, but this time around is the Taurian Venus. The in conjunct, so the way I would look at this, I would have Neptune, I would have Scorpio, Taurus, and Gemini. And I generally am done with trines, sextiles, all the pretty things, easy ones. I'm not interested in that. My astrology advertisement is like, come to me if you want to have difficult conversations. Beautifully had, and gently, but, to the point and to that difficultness. So I would be looking at the most difficult relationship between these archetypes. So I'll be looking at Neptune and Gemini square. And that's an easy one out of them, but it's okay. Then I'll be looking at the Gemini Scorpio in conjunct. And I think that's, and then Gemini Taurus, but then that's this Venus retrograde now. So I would be referring to that argument, that point, if you like. So yeah, so maybe the only thing that I haven't touched on is the Gemini Pisces square. So the elevated or evolved expression manifestation of these two, when they're in a square, which is constant challenge, like they keep challenging each other, is poetry and art. Poetry in particular being that it's language. But I mean, art is a form of language. Everything is a form of language. So instead of being caught in this, instead of using language for spirituality, I would be, and this is a bigger part of this presentation that I edited out, where I was talking and writing about where we keep getting this wrong. What's Piscean age? What about Piscean age has become a pathology that we seem to still carry around with us, which is that we use language for spiritual purposes. And again, I study philosophy, so that's why I keep going back to it. There is a whole school on the back of this guy who said that you can't use language for something that transcends language. You just can't. I mean, or you can, but you are reducing it, and you know, you're not doing it justice. And that bothered me for a long time. Not that I'm spiritual or not. I'm certainly not religious, but spiritual possibly, and certainly astrologically inclined. But it bothered me because, well, then, you know, what do you do? And then I kind of found out, or rather clocked and clicked with the whole art thing, because even though that is my first love and first degree, but still, meaning, how do you speak of things that are unspeakable? Because I want to, whatever my version of spirituality is. And you do it in art. And what that does, it does Neptune. It's unconditional acceptance. So I produce a work of art, poem or a painting or music or whatever, and I display it to you to view, to witness, to experience. I have expressed my Neptune in mercurial ways, words or any other language, but Neptunianly, I have released it to you for you to interpret it however you want to. And for me not to be attached, Neptune, to that, to your interpretation again, but also, it's like leaving that room, unconditional acceptance of your interpretation, and also out of unconditional love, your interpretation is as good as whatever my interpretation or intention behind it would have been, or someone else's interpretation. I think that's it. Sorry, hopefully this was helpful.
That was wonderful. The whole thing. And one other comment that 406569 made was, this was a lot to take in, so informative. I need to watch over and over. Thank you, Maya. And
no, the pleasure was completely mine. And I actually thought maybe I should have said that at the beginning, that it's a lot. And when I give readings, that's what I get. I just, something, whatever. I just give a lot, like, not like I give a lot. I'm like this great person, not at all. But yeah, there's a lot to say, I suppose. And I get that from my clients. They kind of listen to it many times and find new things in it. Sorry, didn't mean to blow my own trumpet if that was doing that. But yeah, nope. I'm beyond grateful to all of you.
Mercury and Gemini, thank you so much. Awesome. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Linda, what happens now?
Yes, well, that brings us to the end of your presentation. Thank you so much from all of us.
Thank you.
We're really hoping to see you again. If you could please just click on stop share there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
You know what I was going to ask you?
Yes.
Sorry, let me just get this share. Yeah. Hello. So, excuse me. Yes. So what happens with this? Like, how can I like share it among my community? Like, how does it work?
Yes, absolutely. But let me explain this to you after we end the meeting. But don't go.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Still live on Facebook at the moment, and of course.
Oh, I see.
You are absolutely welcome to share this anywhere you like. I'll send you the YouTube link. And anyway, we'll talk more about this. But anyway,
yes.
Right now we would like to thank you so much, and we're hoping to see you again. I'll be in touch. And
I would love to. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Unmuting everyone now. Would you all please thank Maya from Darker Materials?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Maya. Bye for now.
Thank
you.
Thank you, Maya. That was marvelous.
Thank you so much. So happy to hear you enjoyed it.